Well, hello guys and welcome back to the channel. I'm just sorting through my 2021 Nightscape images calendars, as you can see here. So I've got quite a few boxes of them here strewn around the place. So I've started shipping those, so there's quite a few have already gone out, and in fact they're going all around the world. So that's good, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I was actually drawn to this image, which is on the October 2021 in the calendar. It's a stargazing Morris commercial truck. Now you'll remember this image because last week we featured this in the video where I was talking about shooting nightscapes in cloudy conditions. And I guess I'm drawn to it because it's one of my favorite images. I only shot this about 2 months ago, so it's a pretty recent shot. And I don't know, I had a lot of comments and interest in this particular image. And I think maybe a lot of you would benefit from me going through the process of how I captured it, how I lit it, and as well as how I post-processed the final image to come up with what we have here in the calendar. So let's do that today for this week's video. I'll start at the beginning and we'll go right through the post-processing and see how we came up with this image. So today we're going to start here with the final image, and I'm going to go through a number of factors here. Now unfortunately I can't take us out into the field for this, so I'm going to show you here all via my computer images. The first thing I want to show you is the overall image here has quite a number of factors going for it. Now firstly, as I discussed in my last video, I've got this gorgeous cloud, which is very high level cloud, and you can see it here sort of tapering off as we get a bit higher in the sky. There is still a little bit of it up here, and that is what has caused these stars to bloat. And this is the Southern Cross up here in the top, and it's coming down as the Milky Way here up higher into the sky. You can see as we go down further, the cloud increases on the horizon, but it's also catching that beautiful orange light. Now, some of you won't consider light pollution to be beautiful at all, but in this particular image, I do, because it helps a number of things. Firstly, it helps silhouette the top of the truck nicely. It gives a gradual fall off in light intensity as it goes up. So I've got a very dark sky up the top here, dark over this side, but it lightens up nicely. And I like that color and the way that the saturation and the tone of the image decreases and increases as we go through the image. So the other factor, of course, is the truck in the foreground and how the truck is lit. And I want to take you through that. Now, this particular final image is made up of my fine art light painting. So I've got a stacked sky and I've got multiple layered foreground images which I've lit. Now I'm going to go through that in a minute. I'm also going to show you a single shot of the exact same composition so that you can compare the two. But before we get to that, I just want to quickly show you how I go about lighting this. And so you can see here that if you look at the side of the truck, you'll notice that there's light coming from all different directions. So I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see there's much more light on this side of the tyre than this side. Same here, you can see there's quite a bit of light here on the front of the grille and the bonnet, but it's darker in this front corner. And that is deliberate because I do not want to light this completely flat from the front angle of the camera. So I want to leave some dark areas through here. And what I really like to do is get off on angles. And I'll be over here lighting this section. I'll be over here lighting the back section. And as well as that, sometimes I'll get close up to the truck, and obviously I'm in the shot, but I have to blend myself out and light the top section. So for example, this top of the bonnet here, and possibly even this top of the roof and this mudguard here, the front fender, I will light that possibly from here down or maybe here down. It just depends on what angle I can get at the time. The other thing I've done is lit the grass at the front here, just a really light, a low level of light there. And the light source, which was only a torch light by the way, is low down to the ground. You can see it's just skipping along and kissing the top of the grass here and also here. So as I've said to you in previous videos, to deconstruct an image is how you can work out how it was lit. And you can see the highlights and the shadows here quite strongly, same on the truck itself. Okay, so what I'd like to do is go into Lightroom and let's begin this whole process of how I actually took this image. So of course what you're seeing here is the final completed image, but I want to show you the single shot. So let's just have a look at that one. while we've got a minute. You can see it doesn't have anywhere near as much dynamics in the color and the saturation and the clarity. So I'll just make that full screen so you can see it a bit better. It's not a bad shot. We've still got the same effect that we had in the previous image, but it just doesn't stand out as much. Now, if I zoom in on this, you can see it's nowhere near as sharp as the other one will be, and I'll show you the details of that one in a minute. Not too bad though for a single shot. Now, there's settings here where this was taken with the Nikon Z6 with a 20mm f1.8 S mount. That's a Z native lens. 15-second shutter speed, f2.8 at ISO 5000. Pretty high ISO. And these are the adjustments I've done. I've increased the exposure a little bit, dropped the highlights, increased the whites. Not much else except I have done some noise reduction. You can see down here a fair bit, 30 plus luminance, plus contrast, and plus 49 color. Remove chromatic aberration. And with this lens and camera, the profile corrections are built in, as you can see there. So I haven't done much else. Now, if you look at the before and after, you can see what's the difference. Essentially, it's really just I've brightened the image up and I've done noise reduction. And that's pretty much all you could. I mean, I could do a little bit more, but I can't make the image too much more sharp. And the reason for that is because I focused to infinity to get the stars sharp. And they're not too bad. They're pretty sharp, but there's a fair bit of noise in there. And this is the whole reason why I like to stack for noise reduction and do my multi-layers. So now I'm going to get onto that process. So what I did next was shoot the same exposures. Now you'll see here 15 seconds, f2.8. I increased the ISO to 6400. Now I did that because I just wanted to get a little bit more light in the sky, in the same exposure. But as well as that, I've increased the exposure here a little bit, just a touch. So you can see once again, I've just increased that a little bit, but I haven't added any other parameters here at all. No noise reduction at all, except the color. Now I've said this to you many times before, but when I use the Z6, I like to increase the color noise a little bit, but I could probably do that later, but I've done it here anyway. So what I did, I was meaning to shoot 10, but I actually shot 11 of exactly the same shot. Plenty of people ask me about this stacking for noise reduction, and I've got quite a few videos that go through this process, but I'm going to go through it again here and do the exact thing that I did last time. So what I'm going to do is select all of those images, and by the way, they are synced, so all the settings are exactly the same. I haven't moved the camera, and you cannot move the camera or tripod when you're taking these shots. You just have to click them one after the other with no gap between, or well, it's a 1 second gap. That's the smallest I can get. All right, so what I did then, I go up to File, Export, and then we have our export dialog box here. So I go into the folder where I want to send them to, and here I found it. I've called these Truck Sky TIFFs. Now I've mentioned this to you as well before, but it's really important to name your files and be very certain of where your files are being sent to out of Lightroom or any other program for that matter, because I see so many people going searching for their files that they've just saved and they can't find them because the computers by default sent them off to some pictures folder somewhere. Now I don't like that. And I'm going to export these as TIFF files, not JPEG, so I'll change that to TIFF, as you can see. So these are high quality output, no watermark, nothing else. And I certainly don't resize to fit. So it's full resolution. And then we click export and away we go. All right, so I've done that. The next thing I'm going to do is open up Sequator. Here's the shortcut on my computer. Opens up and it looks like this. Now, Sequator is a Windows only program that is designed to stack, align, and take the noise out of a number of images, exactly like we've just done. So I'm going to double click on this top one that says Star Images. That will take me to, I've got to find the folder. So we go back to when that was. Let's have a look here. Truck Sky TIFFs, and there they are. Select all of those, open them up, and there we go. It's showing me one of those images. Typically that'll be one of the ones in the middle, because what it's going to do is align all of the other images to that one. So that's how come you don't get star trailing, because this program actually aligns them all and brings them all into alignment. Now the key here is we're going to freeze the foreground so that doesn't blur. Like if you were using a star tracker to shoot this sky, for example, to get a similar type of quality, then what's happening is the foreground is blurry because the camera's moving. But in this case, we don't have that problem. Now, I'm going to, before we move on, go to output because this is how this program works. It's asking me where I want to send the output file. So I'm going to send it here, and I've already done that, but I'll just name it for you. Sequator Truck Sky. And I've done that because I know that that's where I want to send it, into that same folder where the others are. So we press save on that one, and then we move on to the next one. So we're just going down here. So the first thing I'm going to click here is Composition Align Stars. And down the bottom you can see there's a number of check boxes. So I want to align stars, but I want to freeze the ground. So that's what I've clicked on here. And I've also checked selective. And for this particular series of images, it won't make a whole lot of difference. But what that does is actually takes out things like aeroplane trails and satellites and things like that. So I've clicked that. Now the only thing I want to click next is sky region. You can see it's in red. So when I click it, it'll go to green like those ones. So let's click on there. I want to use an irregular mask. Now, what I'm going to do, it comes up automatically with this circle with a cross in the middle. And by holding down my mouse, I'm actually rubbing out the sky. I'm just holding down my left mouse. Now I can use the scroll wheel on my mouse to make that smaller or larger, as you can see. And I'm just going to get down close to the top of the truck and the top of that tree line. Effectively, what's happening here is I'm creating a mask. That's all I'm doing. This is not as precise. Oh, and you can see I just went over the truck there. So to fix that, I just right click and paint it back in again. You can see what's happened there. That's really quite an easy thing to do. As I was saying, it's nowhere near as precise as, for example, Photoshop would be creating a mask, but it doesn't do a bad job. Now, one of the things I've found with this program Sequator is that sometimes it can be quite difficult to see where the join of the ground and the sky is. So what I do, I go over it like that. So I've actually rubbed it out, and I'm just essentially rubbing it back in by right clicking on my mouse. And that makes it a little bit easier to see where that line actually is. An example like this image that we're showing here, it's not such a big problem, to be honest, because these trees don't have any definition. They're a long way away and they didn't really make a whole lot of difference to the image. But when you get close up to something and trees that are in the close foreground, then certainly that can sometimes present a problem. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm just doing it as quickly as I can for you guys. I want to get down close to the top of that truck because there's some stars right down close there. Now, one of the downfalls of this program, in my opinion, is that you can't zoom in to get a really close view of this. A lot of people have suggested, oh, you just use the standard Windows zoom in feature. Yeah, I've tried that, but the resolution drops a long way and it's really not easy to use. So I just do it this way. A little more tedious, but look, honestly, it doesn't take very long. You can see it's not taking me long. This particular image is not a hard one to mask out because the trees are all a long way away and they're fairly, there's not a lot of definition in them, to be honest. See, I can't get that little circle any smaller than that, so I'm just going to have to go with that. So all I've done is I've rubbed out all of the sky. Very important to make sure you rub it all out, because what you rub out here is aligned so that we don't get star trails, and what I've left masked here stays frozen, and that's really important as we get down the track with this, as you will see. Alright, so once we've done that, we press start and wait for the program to do its stuff. One thing I love about this program is how quick it actually does all of this processing. Okie dokie, well you can see there it took 45 seconds to do that. Fantastic. Press close on that and you can see the image as it is. Looks pretty good to me. Nice and clean around that truck. Clean everywhere. Sky looks great. Now before I move away from here, a lot of people ask me about the other settings in this panel. Well, as you can see, most of them are turned off. I've got auto brightness off, high dynamic range off, remove dynamic noise off, reduce distortion effects I've got on auto, might not make a lot of difference, reduce light pollution off, enhance starlight off, merge 4 pixels off, time lapse off, color space sRGB. So that's all the settings that I use when I'm using this program Sequator. I want to keep things as simple as possible. Alright, so I'm going to click out of that, exit without saving. Let's go back to Lightroom. Okay, that's awesome. So we've got those and we're going to now move on to the light painted shots. So I'm going to show you those. And here we go. This is the first one. Now you can see this is me with the light. That's my torch. And you'll see a little bit of me. That's my hand or something or other. I'm not sure. But what I'm doing here is I'm actually lighting the front of the truck. And that's pretty much all. I've got a little bit of this roof of the truck and a little bit of the windscreen. There was a bit of dew on the truck, that's why it's shining like that. These are some of the things you have to worry about when you're out shooting. The other thing is I've got some spillage onto the ground, which is not too bad. I don't mind that. Let's move to the next one. Same thing, shot from the back. So this is lighting the back part of the truck. The settings I've used for this, 20mm lens as usual. I've stopped down to f5. I'm still at 15-second shutter speed, but I've dropped the ISO to 500. The reason I've done that is because I want to make sure that this is a really sharp image. The other thing that I've done is I've actually set my focus to be really sharp onto the truck. So I've picked a part of the truck here, anywhere here will do, focused and made sure my focus is spot on the truck. My shots back here, let's just go back for a second, of the night sky, the focus is on infinity, and it's really critical to have infinity focus when you're shooting the stars. But when I'm shooting these foregrounds, I don't want infinity focus necessarily. What I want is focus on my foreground subject. Now, if that foreground subject is a fair way away from the camera, it probably is already at infinity, so it doesn't matter so much. So I shot here about 8 foreground images. Now, a couple of these you can see are almost identical. I did that because I wasn't totally sure which one I wanted to use. So when I get into the processing of this, and you'll see that in a minute, I won't be using both of those. Now, one thing I'll show you, I'll just point out to you here, you can see quite a bit of hot pixel noise here. Now, I don't like that hot pixel noise, but I'm going to get rid of it later. One thing I've noticed with mirrorless cameras in particular is they seem to be a little bit worse for hot pixel. You can see it there. It's easy to get rid of, but you've got to be mindful that it's there because it's really easy for that to slip through into the final image if you're not. So there's another one I shot. Now, I showed you before that I light sometimes from above. So here's an example of that. Now, I'm actually standing here, right up close to the truck, but my torch is right up there above, and you can see I'm lighting the top. I'm trying to avoid hot spots like that. It's really hard to do, especially when there's dew around and the vehicle in this case is wet. You can see the windscreen's wet. Therefore, there's more reflection on the surface. But nevertheless, it's not too bad. And one of the good things about stopping down the ISO and the aperture is my dynamic range increases. Now, what is dynamic range? Dynamic range is the ability of the camera to maintain highlights and shadows. So if that's a highlight, it's almost blown out. If I was still shooting at ISO 6400 at f2.8, that would definitely be blown out. So I've retained a little bit more dynamic range in my shots, and I find that to be critical when shooting these types of images. You can see there I've just lit the inside. I put and there's a lot of noise in that image. Have a look at that. Hot pixel noise, even though it was cold. It's a bit of a funny thing. But anyway, orange gel over my Z96 video light just to highlight the inside of the cab. Then I've got another couple of shots where all I've done here is just lit the foreground here. Just a little bit. I don't want too much. The intention here is not to light the truck at all, but it's just the overspill that you'll notice there. A little bit here on the other side. So you can see down here, a little bit more. Once again, you can see that noise. Have a look at that. It's pretty bad, isn't it? Anyway, we'll get rid of that later on. Oh, and by the way, before I go too much further, I'll show you my adjustments I've done here. Because when I originally shot it, I'll show you the before and after. I've again brightened up the image because sometimes in camera when you're shooting, you're not 100% sure if you've got the exposure right. So what I like to do is make sure it's not blowing out, but at the same time, when I get it back into Lightroom like I've done here, I like to increase the exposure. Now the reason I do this, and you'll notice I've put clarity into this image. Normally I wouldn't put too much clarity into Nightscape images because of the high ISOs and the fact that clarity increases noise levels. But when I've stopped down my aperture and ISO like I have here, I can afford to do that. And the reason I like clarity is because it makes these tones in these foregrounds really pop out and grab your attention. Now for this image, I want my foreground, I want this truck to be the star of the show. Sure, I love the night sky and I love the Southern Cross and I love that misty cloud and the glow and everything else. It's a complete package, but I certainly want to make sure that this truck is the star of the show. Therefore, I've increased the exposure a bit, hardly anything else, added clarity, and down here we've added a little bit of noise reduction, luminance, contrast, and color in my case. In your camera, you may not need to adjust the color noise reduction at all. It just depends what camera you're using. I find with the mirrorless, especially the Nikon mirrorless like I'm using, it does benefit from that. Now, one more thing I'll talk about before we move on from here is I use my torch LED Lenser P7.2 with a half CTO orange gel on it to light paint. And I've set my white balance here at was about 4,250 Kelvin. You can see it there. Using the white balance of about that temperature balances out the color quite nicely, because LED torches tend to be a bit blue for my liking. So by balancing that out with a half CTO orange gel, I get a much more natural color. That's what I'm seeing, and that's what I like in my images. I mean, this truck doesn't really have a color as such. It's been weather beaten for years and years and years out in the paddock. And of course, a lot of you are going to say to me, well, look, just change the white balance when you get it here into Lightroom. Of course, I can do that. And many times I will do that. But I want to just keep everything consistent when I'm out shooting in the field. All right, does that make sense? So what I'm going to do now is select all of those light painted images. I'm going to right click on one of them. Now you'll notice this dialog box come up. Edit in. Go across to open as layers in Photoshop. Done this plenty of times before, but here we go again. And let's see what this does. All right, well, as you can see, after a few minutes, all of these separate layers are opened here in Photoshop, one on top of the other. I need to get my background sky into this, so I'm going to go to File, Open, and navigate to where that file is. It's not in there, so let's just go and find it. All right, so there we go. Click on Open, and you can see I've brought it in. It's in a separate place, so I need to highlight that. I press Ctrl A to highlight the image, and I'll just copy it and paste it. So you can go up to Edit, Copy, and Paste. Once again in Edit, or Ctrl V, it says there. Don't like to use keyboard shortcuts too much when I'm showing you these things, because people get confused. Anyway, there it is. It's now coming on the top of the stack. Now where I want that to be is actually on the bottom. So I'm going to just drag it right down to the bottom. All right, now you can't see it, because with Photoshop, whatever's on the top is what you see. And you can see if I disable those, you can see each layer appear. Pretty smart, isn't it? And that's how the program works. So what I'm going to do, just to give you a bit of a brief look at how this image is going to finally look, I'm going to select the top one and hold down Shift on the keyboard and click on the second last image. So I've highlighted all of the foreground images. Now I'm just going to go into my blend mode here, which says normal at this stage. I'm going to click on that and go down to the one that says lighten. And suddenly we get a bit of an idea of what this whole thing is going to look like. Now, of course, we've still got all these light painting streaks. We've still got all the star trails from the images that were foreground images that are streaking and dotting all over the place. But we're going to get rid of those in a minute. But that's not too bad. Just looking at that, you can see, oh, okay, I'm in the ballpark. I actually pretty much like what I'm seeing there. What we're going to do now is select one of these images. Let's just start with that one for a start. And that should do. And I'm going to work on each of these individually just to show you how we're going to do this. So first things first, I'm going to add a layer mask. The reason I'm adding a layer mask is because I want to be able to rub out portions of this image, and adding a layer mask, which I do by pressing this little square down the bottom here, gives me the opportunity to do that. And if I make a mistake, I can go back and rub it back in again. It's invaluable. So it's a little white box. I want to go over here and you can see black and white. Now I want to make sure that the top box is black. If I click that little arrow, it goes back to white. If it's white, nothing will happen at the beginning here, so it's got to be black. Then I go to my paintbrush tool. You'll see it here. Click on that, brush tool, and up here we look at the opacity. I want to make that 100%. I want to rub this out entirely. And in fact, what I'm going to do here is rub out all of that sky. To help me along with this, I'm going to make that a hard brush and a fairly large one. So yeah, a big brush like that. And to also help me so I can see this a bit better when I've rubbed it out, I'm going to click on that bottom layer just for the moment, change the opacity to about 50 or thereabouts, something like that. The reason I'm doing this is so that I can see what I'm doing. If I'd left that at 100%, it's a lot harder for me to actually see what I'm rubbing at because the background's still there. So let's go back to this layer mask, start rubbing it out. And you see what I mean? I can actually see now what I'm rubbing out. If I had have left that sky at 100% down the bottom there, I couldn't see that. Remember, I'm still using a hard brush here. And all I'm doing is getting down close to the truck at this point in time. Doesn't need to be right on the truck. And I'll zoom in on the image so I can see it a little bit better. Okay. Now, you can see there's a few stars that I want to get rid of. In fact, I can get rid of all of those trees and all of that light in the background. There's traffic on the road down there. And I can go in close, and I'm still using a hard brush. So don't get too dismayed about that. And I've got really rough edges. I'm going to get down to the truck. Now, I'm not using selection tools. Hear me very clearly. No selection tools were used in the making of this image. Now, I'm not saying you can't use selection tools. What I'm saying here is you don't need to. I'm only roughly around the top of that truck. Now, the reason I'm roughly around it is because there are no stars to worry about. If there were stars right down there, I'd be a little bit more exact about this. Anyway, all I've effectively done there, and in a very rough manner, by the way, is rub out the sky. You can see that. Nothing to it, really. Now, if I go back to my bottom layer and turn the opacity back up again, you'll suddenly see it looks awesome. Have a look at that. And going right in close, you can see that. Look at that. There is no issue with blending that around the truck. This makes it so much easier than having to try and select all of this stuff. It's no, we don't need to do that. We've got to keep it nice and simple. That's my philosophy with editing images. Simple is better. Okay, so I've been working on this formula for quite a long time. And once again, people say to me, oh, why don't you use a star tracker? Well, if I used a star tracker, I couldn't use this concept because I've got to somehow blend that in. I couldn't blend that truck in any other way but by selecting all of these trees and everything else. So this is why I like to use the stacking for noise reduction method. Okay, let's move on. Now, one thing I do want to do here is remove the noise that we saw earlier. Let's just go down. Yeah, see all of this noise that we're seeing here? There's quite a bit of it. Sometimes you can rush through these edits and miss this noise. There's not so much over that side, but there's quite a bit here for some reason. What I'm going to do is select the layer here, not the layer mask. Make sure you're on the layer. Go up to Filter, go down to Noise, and go to Dust and Scratches. Now, this Dust and Scratches filter, I put the radius to 1, threshold to 0, which on my machine here comes up as default, and click OK. Have a look at that. The noise is all gone. All those hot pixels have disappeared. There's none there. None there at all. Look at that. And you might say, oh, well, has it wrecked the image? No, that doesn't wreck the image. The image is fine. Okay, let's move on. Let's enable our second layer. Now, you can see the second layer is actually lighting this part of the truck. You can see there's me in there. What I'm going to do here is apply a layer mask to that layer. But my method here is to, why do I reinvent the wheel? I've just created a layer mask here on this first layer. I'll just go copy it down to the second layer, and that's going to rub out all of that sky. I don't have to do the same thing. To do that, I hold down Alt on my machine, drag it down and let it go. And now you can see that layer has exactly the same layer mask as the top one. Now, I do have to get rid of this little bit here, which is me. And you might think I have a complex. Well, I probably do, because I'm always rubbing myself out of images. But nevertheless, that's what I have to do sometimes. I've just softened the brush, by the way, just in case I need to blend some of these bits in later. Okay, so there we have the top two layers. As you can see, this is my method of light painting, fine art light painting. Let's move to the next one. And the next layer is almost identical to the second layer. And I'll copy the mask down, but the reality is I may not use both of those because they're almost identical. Let's go to the next layer. Okay, so here we are. This particular layer has started to fill in a lot of the top here, because you can see where the torch is shining down on the truck here. So you can see there, I'm standing here. This is the torch that you can see, and I'm shining down onto the top area of this side panel here. Okay, so I'm going to, again, grab hold of that mask, hold down Alt, drag it down. Now that's disappeared, but it hasn't disappeared here because I didn't rub that out on the previous two layers. So on this layer, which is that one, I'm going to rub it out. Nice soft brush this time. And just get down there, rub it out. Now it's still on 100% opacity. It's on about 125 there, and I think that's all I probably need to do with that. Now, if I just toggle these on and off, you can see what difference they make. Not a whole lot, to be absolutely honest. So one of those is going to have to go. I'm not sure which yet. So anyway, at this point in time, I'm just going to leave it all in there so I can see what I'm doing. Let's move on. We'll just keep going down. Now, once again, over the top. So I'm going to grab that layer mask, drag it down, and that's applied that layer mask. Good as gold. Again, that's the inside of the truck. See how the cab's lit? So I'm going to apply that layer mask, drag it down once again. And the same thing again. Let's drag that one down. So now I've got 8 layer masks. I've only had to do the layer mask once. So all I need to do now is fine tune. One thing I do know is that what is going to be present is some of that hot pixel noise in my, oh, have a look at that. Now that is ugly. All right. So what I'm going to do is apply that dust and scratches filter. That is terrible, isn't it? To each one of these layers. I know it's not on the background layer because that's in the sky. That's already been through Sequator, and there'll be no noise in that, but it's definitely going to be on these other layers. So what I'm going to do is just click on that second layer, go to filter, noise, dust and scratches, 1 radius, 0 threshold. Okay, go to the next one and do exactly the same thing. And so I've applied that filter on every layer, and now it's as clean as a whistle. Love it. Really, really nice. So now we get into the artistic side of what we're going to do with this image, and perhaps work out whether I want to keep all of these layers or not. So you can see here, once I turn bits and pieces off, you can see what happens. Yeah, I'm thinking that one, I don't need that layer, so I'm just going to leave it off for the time being. And a trick that I've worked out over the years is if I right click on that layer mask, I can click on disable layer mask and it puts a red cross into it. And therefore that shows me a visual cue as to which layer I'm not wanting to reintroduce. Because sometimes when I turn these on and off, I get a bit lost with which one I'm working on. It's just normal to do that, so don't stress if that's happened to you guys, but that's one of the things that I often do. One thing that I'm going to adjust is this pool of light that's around the truck. So I've just got to identify which layer each one of those is on. So if I click on that very top layer, the first one, you can see that the area of light there disappears. So what I'm going to do is go back. This time I'm going to make it a soft brush and quite a large one. So something like that. Then I'm going to drop the opacity down to about 50 or 60, thereabouts, and just gently rub into that. And see how it's feathering that pool, so it's not so bright anymore. And that's what I'm after. So I'm going to do the same thing on the next one, wherever I've got to identify which layer it is. Okay, there's one. Now you can see here, this particular layer makes a big difference to this area down the bottom. So what I'm going to do is go to that one, click on the layer mask, and do exactly the same thing. Just feather it in. You can see how it's feathering, softening it. Now I want the truck still to have a fair bit of highlight, so I'm not going to get rid of it completely. I'm just feathering it nicely. Okay, now this is looking pretty good. I'm just going to zoom in a fraction on this truck now because I want to see exactly what I need to change, if anything, in this center section of the truck. This part of the image here on this layer is too bright. I like it to be a little bit, but I want to have highlight and shadow in there. I particularly like that mossy look on the truck there. So I'm going to change the size of the brush, bring it down a fair way. So I like this. I love that. I love that weather-beaten look here. But there's a bit of highlight there, which I'm not sure about. So I'm going to try and blend that in a little bit. So once again, I'm still at 50% on my brush. Soft brush, remember? Make it a fraction bigger. And I'm just going to, see that? I'm just rubbing sections of this out just to blend it. My point is to blend it in, not to make it disappear, just to blend it. It doesn't have to be overly aggressive with this. Now I'm just going to see how I'm getting right into that window, and I'm rubbing out this particular part of the layer so that that orange shows through a little bit. That looks a lot better, doesn't it? When you use a bigger brush, it smooths it out more. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do here. Let me tell you, you can sit here for hours working on these fine detail edits, and that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to show you my technique and show you how I go about doing what I'm doing here. Before we go anywhere, I'm going to do some work on this sky layer, the background. I want to really punch that out more. So I'm going to add what is known as an adjustment layer. So we'll click on that, and I'll go to a curves adjustment layer, and that gives you this little graph here. I'm just going to boost up the mid-tone there and perhaps just drop down. See how that's added drama to the sky? Isn't that beautiful? Now, and by the way, that's without and that's with. How about that? Isn't that gorgeous? Without, with. One thing I will do, and I'll show you this, I'm going to turn off all these foreground layers because I just want to work on this background. Now remember how I mentioned how the stars are bloated a little bit and they're showing, you can see the Southern Cross a bit better, but what I am going to show you is my star minimization technique. Nothing original, I didn't create this. It's not my technique, I don't know who created it, but it's something a lot of people use and I use it too. The first thing I will do is actually duplicate that layer. So I'll go up to layer, duplicate. And now I've got two to play with, so I'm going to keep an original just in case something goes wrong. Turn off all the foreground layers because I don't want this to have an effect on them. And what I'm going to do here is go to layer, merge visible. And you'll see now that that has been created into one layer. I'm going to go up to select, color range, and we're going to go to highlights. Then we're going to increase the fuzziness and decrease the range to about there. This is all subjective to your own taste as well, so don't necessarily just copy my exact numbers here. Your image will be different. Click OK. Now you can see it's selected all these images and the highlights. Now what I'm going to do is select, modify, expand, 2 pixels. So we're going to go 2 pixels there. It's selected a lot more now. Then I'm going to select, modify, feather, 1 pixel. We go to 1 and that's just going to feather those. Now I'm going to go to filter, right down the bottom where it says other and minimum. Click on minimum and I'm going to select 0.3. This is not going to do much, but I don't want to overdo this because you end up getting blotchy skies if you do too much of this. I'm going to make sure my preserve here is set to roundness and I'm going to click OK. And that's going to sit there and do its work. And then I'm going to deselect the image. And there we have the difference. Now I'll show you the difference between that and what we had before. See that? It's actually made the stars, the bright stars, stand out a little bit more. Now one other thing I might do is I'm going to add another curves adjustment layer right here. So let's do that. And I just want to increase that and drag it up to about there. Drop that one just that tiny little bit. And we don't want to go too far because I don't want to give it that really terrible look. I'm going to turn the other layers back on. So there we have pretty much our final image. You can see the Southern Cross, lovely bit of nebula through here, through the Milky Way, that gorgeous low cloud and that light pollution. Yes, light pollution. I'm calling light pollution gorgeous, but I think it is in this image. And we've got the truck here standing out in the foreground, no noise, clean image, love it. Now what I'm going to do before I finish this is go up to layer, flatten image. Yes, I'm flattening all of these images. Now if you think that you want to come back and re-edit anything on these images, then you wouldn't do this. You'd save it as a layered file. But for me, I'm going to click OK on that, and now I've only got one layer. As you can see, I'm going to cross out of the program, Photoshop, and say yes to save it. And now it's going to take me back to Lightroom. And there we are. There's our image in Lightroom. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? Now, when we get this back to Lightroom, we can have a look at the image overall and say, well, is there anything I don't like about this image? Let's just go full screen. I mean, I like it. I really, really do. As I've mentioned a few times, I love the dynamics of this image. The colors match, the sky matches the truck. You've got the large Magellanic Cloud here, which here in the Southern Hemisphere is just a jewel in the sky. It's beautiful. We've got the Southern Cross, which everybody loves the Southern Cross down here in the Southern Hemisphere. And I think this is just a wonderful, wonderful image. Well, I hope that made sense to you guys, and I hope you got something out of it. Both the technique for shooting it and lighting it, and also the post-processing back here in the studio. Now, these calendars are available to purchase now, $20 Australian plus postage. Now, the exchange rate is great for you guys over in the United States or the United Kingdom, so these are pretty cheap, and I'm happy to send them all around the world. Unfortunately, there's a couple of countries because of the COVID thing that I can't send them to. Nothing to do with me. It's all about the postal service. India is one of those places, but I think most countries around the world, it won't be a problem. So anyway, if you want one, I'll leave the link down below where you can just go to my website and sort it out, and I'll ship it to you as soon as I possibly can. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me here again today. I'll look forward to seeing you next time, hopefully out there under the stars somewhere. You have a fantastic week. I'll see you later.